and Jerry's friends who were there had a tough time forgiving themselves.
There are very few jobs you can be 100% failure at, and being an agent on the Kennedy detail was you were 100% failure. We were like brothers. We knew every act and every move that the agent would make. Like brothers, we knew every act and every move that the agent would make.
I'm bringing in now Clint Hill, a former U.S. Secret Service agent for President Kennedy, who was in the presidential motorcade when the president was killed. Clint, I can't thank you enough for being here with us. And I want to just set up your story a little bit, because these are some now iconic photos. You're climbing on top of the presidential motorcade. Let's pull them up here. You're essentially pushing First Lady Jackie Kennedy out of the way to protect her. That's you. Can you just take a moment and walk us through that day?
Well, we had this motorcade into Dallas because the president was going to make a speech at a place called the Trademark.
Yeah.
And the whole trip was based on maximum exposure because Kennedy and Johnson wanted to make sure they could get as big a vote in Texas in 1964 as possible because they needed it. So we started out from left field, we drove into the city, and the crowds got larger and larger and larger, and they were just immense, larger than anybody anticipated.
And as a Secret Service agent, you're looking at that.
Well, we were, and we at that time were a little understaffed because of a number of transfers that had just been made to the field, and we had some pretty young, raw agents working on important positions, and that was difficult. But we got through the crowd okay, and I got up in the back of the car a few times because of the driver keeping the car closer to the left-hand side of the street where Mrs. Kennedy was on the left, keeping the president away from the right of the crowd. Okay. We were in a place called Dealey Plaza, and I was on the running board of the follow-up car right behind the president's car. Left-hand side, I was scanning the whole area, and all of a sudden I hear this explosive noise over my right shoulder. It came from the rear.
Did you know what it was right away?
I did not know what it was. It was just an explosive noise. It could have been a firecracker. I wasn't sure what it was. So I started to turn toward the noise, but I only got as far as the president's vehicle because I saw what happened. I saw the president grab at his throat like this, and then he started to fall to his left. And I knew then that it was a gunshot. So I jumped from my position and started to run to the president's car with the intent of getting up on top of the back of it to form a shield there to protect both President and Mrs. Kennedy. And just as I got to the president's car, just as before I got there, another shot hit the president in the head. He at that time was leaned way over to his left, and Mrs. Kennedy's face was right against his. And the shot actually hit him back here, but it erupted out of the upper right quadrant of the rear of the head, and there was brain matter and bone fragments and blood all over me, all over the car, all over Mrs. Kennedy. And at that point, she came up in the truck. She was trying to grab some of the material that came out of the president's head. And she did get some of it in one of her hands. And she didn't even know I was there. I grabbed her and put her in the back seat. When that happened, the president's body fell to its left into her lap. His head was right in her lap. Right side of his face was up. I could see his eyes were fixed. There's a hole in the skull, and I could see in that hole there was no brain matter left whatsoever. So I assumed it was a fatal wound. I turned and gave a thumbs down to the follow-up car and screamed at the driver, "Get us to a hospital." Yeah. And he immediately accelerated, and we ended up at Parkland Hospital.
And you were on top of Mrs. Kennedy?
I laid up on top of the back of the top seat, right on the back seat, to cover both President and Mrs. Kennedy.
From the book and from some of the interviews that I've seen, you were convinced that there were 3 shots. One hit the president, one hit Governor Connolly, and the third shot hit and killed President Kennedy.
That's correct.
Now you know that is contradicted by the Warren Commission. They concluded that that first shot hit Kennedy and Connolly, second shot missed and struck near a bystander, and the third shot killed him.
I recognize that, but 2 of us believe that the second shot hit the Governor Connolly. The other person who believes that is Nellie Connolly, who was sitting right beside him when he was hit. So I think I'm pretty good company in believing that the second shot hit the governor, the third shot was a fatal wound to the president.
I believe there were two mistakes that the Warren Commission made, that they did not call Sam Kinney, who was the driver of the follow-up car, or Emory Roberts, the shift leader, because Sam Kinney had to keep his eye constantly on the presidential limousine. And Sam saw all three shots find their mark. And Emory saw all three shots find their mark. Unfortunately, they weren't asked to testify.
In the 12 years since that assassination, undoubtedly you have thought and thought and thought again about it, and studied it. Do you have any reason to believe that there was more than one gun, more than one assassin? Was Lee Harvey Oswald alone, or were there others with him?
There were only 3 shots. And it was one gun, 3 shots.
You're satisfied Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone?
Completely.
I was scanning the left side of the street on Daly Plaza, and I heard an explosive noise to my right rear. And so I scanned from my left to my right, going toward that noise. When I did so, I scanned across the back of the car. And what I saw was the president grab at his throat and lurch to his left. I knew something was wrong. So I jumped from the car and ran toward the presidential vehicle. Now, there was another shot, the second shot. I did not hear that because I was running. Just before I got to the car, there was a third shot, and it hit the president in the head, causing an explosion to the upper right of his head, and brain material and blood spattered all about, including on myself.
Have your feelings changed over the years?
Not really. Deep down, I still have that sense of guilt that I should have been able to get there quicker, and I didn't.
You tweeted recently, responding to some conspiracy theories this week. I know what I saw, heard, felt, that in addition to all the evidence I've seen points to one shooter, Lee Harvey Oswald, 3 shots, all from the same position.
And all of the agents that I worked with had that same sense, that they wished that they had been in my position, because I was the only one who had a chance to do anything.
You did what you could, and I appreciate you joining us here on set, Clint, to talk about this with us back in the news today. I appreciate you sharing your story.
the president was shot in the head before Clint got there, and Clint gave it a superhuman effort. So, and there is not one shred of evidence that it was a conspiracy.
Within a minute after the shooting, a Dallas police officer, Joe Marshall Smith, ran toward the parking lot, toward the grassy knoll and stockade fence area, and he encountered a man, and Smith had his gun drawn. He encountered a man who identified himself and flashed some credentials that he was Secret Service, and yet there were no Secret Service men on the ground.
Yeah.
Any idea who that person could have been? I mean, clearly he had some identification that looked official to the officer. Any idea what that could have been?
I have
no idea.
I don't know.
I'm going to have to keep digging, aren't I?
You are. I can't help.
It wasn't a Secret Service agent.
No, that you can be sure of. There were no agents in the area other than on the motorcade.
Conspiracy. If you go through the book and you follow Oswald's actions of taking a shot at General Walker, I believe that he just felt that, by golly, somebody is going to realize that Lee Harvey Oswald lived.
I don't know what this is all about.
I'll kill the president.
No, sir, I didn't keep it back in the Sir?
Come on, man.
No, they're taking me in because of the fact that I lived in the Soviet Union. I'm just a patsy.
This happened in less than 6 seconds after the president was hit in the throat.
From what you say and what you're describing, he was shot from the front.
I'll always believe that because of the wounds that I observed at Parkland High Life. And the rest of my life, I will always know he was shot from the front.
From what you say and what you're describing, he was shot from the front.
That's correct.
Meaning there had to be 2 gunmen.
At least one, and maybe 2 more.
And you believe that?
I'll always believe that because of the wounds that I observed at Parkland.
But in the early 1960s, he was a third-year resident at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, assigned to the trauma team, where he had observed hundreds of gunshot wounds.
We ran into the emergency room, and there was bedlam, total bedlam. People were running in. People were crying. He had barely a pulse. He had an agonal respiration. He had no blood pressure whatsoever. And then he was wrapped in a sheet, and we placed him in a coffin. But before we did, I looked at the wound again. I wanted to know and remember this the rest of my life. And the rest of my life, I will always know he was shot from the front.
The bullet struck about where and passed about where?
From here through.
And taking out
the back or the occipital part, the back of your head. This was gone in our view, and that's the reason we could see the cerebellum. The second wound was here in the throat, right above the necktie. It was a small opening, very small, 3 to 5 millimeters, about the size of your little finger.
Because the wound in the back and the wound in the front were essentially the same in appearance, both of them look like entry wounds.
But it seems almost incomprehensible that a team of highly intelligent, highly trained doctors could be standing over the President of the United States and see wounds that you say came from the front, and yet the official government story is it came from the back, and wait this long to break the silence.
Intimidation, fear, and career-mindedness.
Those were the factors.
Exactly. But again, you have to understand the time in 1963. The people that were with this country were telling you what to do, how to do it, and I think the feeling was we went along to get along. Dr. Baxter had wanted no one to say anything because he was worried about commercialization.
Well, I made the statement that any one of us in the school or in the hospital that ever made a dime off of anything they said about the assassination, I would try to see that their medical career was ruined.
That's the reason I waited so long. I waited until I felt I'm at the end of my career. I don't fear my peers because I think they believe it too.
Lee Harvey Oswald, the accused presidential assassin, was shot. And though mortally wounded, he too was brought here. Inside, there was another urgent rush of medics to the trauma room. Among them, again, the young Dr. Crenshaw.
The nurse came and tapped me on the shoulder and asked if I would take the phone call. And I picked up the phone, and it was like thunder, like God was talking. He said, "This is the president, Lyndon B. Johnson." I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "How is the accused assassin doing?" I said, "Well, he's critical, but right now he is holding his own." He then said, "I want you to take a message to the operating surgeon and have a deathbed statement from Oswald." I never talked to the Warren Commission. No one knew ever that Lyndon Johnson called Parkland.
What was your reaction when you saw the results, photographs and the sketches from Bethesda, the autopsy done there?
It was beyond disbelief for me. I could not believe that a real pathologist would put out something this poorly.
Was this the same man you saw as far as John Kennedy, the same body that you observed?
Not from the pictures that I saw. And I put him in the coffin.
So you say their report in effect is a fraud?
I say that it's wrongly done, and the way it was done, maybe they were directed to do it that way. Well, and all of a sudden, there was a page over the overhead, and that was a page stat for Dr. Tom Shires. The chief of surgery is never paged, so I picked up the phone, and there the operator said, "The president's been shot." So I dropped the phone down, ran through the operating room, and picked up an attending physician, Dr. McClellan. We ran through the anesthesia lecture room, down 2 floors, into the emergency room. And there we entered into bedlam. People were running around, no one knew each other. One FBI guy hit a Secret Service or vice versa. I saw out of the corner of my eye then Vice President Johnson coming into the room, going into the little medicine corner. He was holding his left chest. I was wondering, since I'm a Texan, whether or not he might have had a coronary. But he was walking there. He obviously looked pale and drawn. President Kennedy lying on the table. And I saw the 2 wounds. The first, the entrance wound in the throat, and then the large wound in his head on the right rear, parietal occipital. Those were the only 2 wounds that the people at Parkland saw. Because of its spherical nature, small entrance, and I guess experience. I'd graduated in '60, so at the end of 3 years, I'd already seen at least 50 to 60 gunshot wounds per year, since Parkland is known as the trauma hospital of Dallas. The exit wound came from the hypothesis of the Council of the Warren Commission. And the reason that the wound in the head was an exit wound, it went in right over the ear, tangentially on the right, and then out the back. And there was a cerebellum hanging there. The chairman or head of the emergency room at one time dictated, even in the Parkland Bulletin, that no one in that room would ever speak of the things that happened in that room. But moreover, to protect him, I think mostly it was because of the commercialism, that he did not want some young physician to go out and to hang up his shingle and say that he had worked on Kennedy. There's a fear in Dallas, an atmosphere that only people can know what it was like, having the Secret Service go around to your apartment and to talk to your neighbors and to ask whether you were communist or Republican, and to inspect your pictures that you had developed at the Kodak place. But he was shot from the front, and Lee Harvey Oswald only got to shoot from the back.
Dispatches you people have been given, but I emphatically deny these charges. But I emphatically deny these charges. But I emphatically deny these charges.
John F. Kennedy became the nation's president 50 years ago this week. And now, 5 decades later, his Secret Service agents are breaking their silence about Kennedy's assassination. They told our Carson Chambers about their regrets and the powerful guilt in their lives.
Everyone can pinpoint a moment in life we wish we could change, details we often dwell on. These three United States Secret Service agents have this in common, and their regrets start in Tampa in November of 1963.
It was sunny outside. We had 28 miles of motorcade. We had an appearance at Lopez Field and also the National Guard Armory.
Agent Gerald Blaine was working the president's detail that day.
And he tapped the agent in charge on the shoulder and said, "Would you have the Ivy League charlatans drop back to the follow-up car?" And the president said essentially, "Look, my political style is to be with the people."
The president's orders, given along Kennedy Boulevard, set the stage, they say, for the tragedy that unfolded 100 yards after a slow turn onto Elm Street in Dallas.
We had to top off because the weather conditions were such that it was a beautiful day.
Agent Clint Hill's Secret Service detail was to protect Mrs. Kennedy. His regrets are he couldn't do more.
And I heard that explosive noise from the right rear. What I saw was the president grab at his throat, so I jumped off the follow-up car, ran toward the presidential vehicle. The driver accelerated, and the car started to move forward, causing me to slip. I regained my foothold, but before I did, a third shot rang out.
Hill has spent nearly 50 years dissecting those 6 seconds.
Well, I was the only one in a position to do anything. If I'd have been maybe a second and a half faster, quicker, I'd have been there in time.
Agent Zobrel was in Tampa, but not in Dallas, and still shoulders guilt.
I thought if I had been there, maybe history would have been a little different.
And that was the, the terrible thing. When he was assassinated, we all had a very guilty feeling about it and felt that we had failed.
These three Secret Service agents still dwell on these details, the kind that changed them and history.
It never gets any easier.
In Tampa, I'm Carson Chambers, ABC Action News.
I was really at a lot of different faces in history that were extremely important. And at the time I was there, I didn't look at it that way.
Hill witnessed presidents at their highs and lows, from traveling the world to the chaos of Vietnam and Watergate, to shielding First Lady Jackie Kennedy in the midst of her husband's assassination. In his post-presidential life, Hill met author Lisa McCubbin. The two formed a bond, and McCubbin became the lens through which the world would hear Hill's story.
Now, here's the family. This is a good shot of that.
Reliving one single day in history.
I'm standing on the back of the car.
Happens every single day for Gerald Blaine, even after 50 years.
It's an event in your life that just hangs with you, and you never get it out of your mind.
This is Jerry now. This was him half a century ago, right there in that dark suit, standing just a few feet away from President Kennedy as a Secret Service agent on the Kennedy detail whenever JFK turned around.
I think that's the back of my head.
There was Jerry.
President Kennedy was very personable. He knew all of us by name. He knew our families, and he'd come by and tell his latest joke. He had the best sense of humor in the world, and he was a delight to be with. So as far as we were concerned, it was like losing a member of your family.
His rendezvous with grim destiny begins a little after noontime as his plane lands in Dallas.
As fate would have it, Jerry Blaine had left the president's side that morning. He'd gone ahead to Austin, the president's next planned stop. He couldn't be there to try and save JFK, and Jerry's friends who were there had a tough time forgiving themselves.
There are very few jobs you can be 100% failure at. And being an agent on the Kennedy detail was, you were 100% failure.
That one day in November and the days following have in many ways defined Jerry's entire life.
This is a picture of all of the agents.
3 years ago, he wrote a book about what all the agents went through. They were dark days. Just ask his wife.
There was nothing said. You know, it was, you didn't know what to say. He didn't know what to say. And you were processing, could this really have happened?
I will do my best. That is all I can do.
Immediately after the assassination, Jerry was assigned to protect the new president, Lyndon Johnson. And that's when Jerry himself nearly rewrote history. Listen to this. He was outside Johnson's private residence standing guard in the middle of the night. And after 3 sleepless days, he was confused and nearly shot the brand new president.
So I heard a noise, and I picked up the Thompson submachine gun and activated it on the top, put it to my shoulder, and around the corner of the house came the new president. So I recognized his profile. He looked at me, and it was dark, but I swear he turned white.
Jerry's 81 years old and he's retired now, and he lives out here in Grand Junction. But he still travels around and occasionally gives speeches about the assassination, and he still stays in touch with the few agents who are still alive from back then.
Unfortunately, there are not too many of them left, and so it gets a little lonely.
It was a long time ago, but it seems like only yesterday when you were part of history and still relive it every single day.
It was very hard for me to talk about it. I went through and still go through once in a while, depending on what brings it up, the event itself.
Just the fact that somehow we had failed just threw us in a state of not only shock but depression.
I had guilt. I felt that I was the only agent on the follow-up card that had the opportunity to do anything because of the position I was in. And so the guilt in myself built up over the years and became rather severe.
And of course, my wife and my family were all very instrumental in helping get through all that trauma.
After the assassination, we were so busy we never had a chance to talk to anybody. There was no counseling available for us. I did testify before the Warren Commission and that type of thing. We all prepared reports, but we never really sat down and talked to each other about the assassination.
We lost one president. We went to work immediately with the next one. We just focused. We didn't want that to happen again.
Finally, in 1990, I went back to Dallas to walk Dealey Plaza to look at the 6-4 depository, and I came to the conclusion that I did everything I could that day. There was nothing more I could have done.
The limousine was traveling 11 miles an hour. He had to run 15 miles an hour to catch that car, and he hadn't even reached the car when the third shot hit.
It took me 27 years to do it, but I went back and made an evaluation that what I had done was the best I could do. I couldn't have made that much of a difference.
And when I started the book, we found out that we had lost touch somewhere along the way. And that's what we see in the Discovery Channel film as a reunion of the people. And I think just observing that, you can see the emotions.
To a story now you'll only see this morning on Way 3 Sunrise. One of John F. Kennedy's Secret Service agents breaks his silence, revealing secret details during JFK's presidency. Way 3's Derek Kupish sits down with the retired agent here in Louisville.
Almost 50 years later, President JFK's assassination remains as mysterious and controversial as the day it happened. An author cracks open this book, sharing details of what happened during his visit to the Metro.
We were like brothers. We knew every act and every move that the agents would make.
A team of men,
there are about 5 agents,
share a single mission to protect the President of the United States.
It was very difficult because we averaged about 80 hours a month overtime. We were constantly on the road.
On November 22nd, 1963, Secret Service agent Gerald Blaine and his team failed that mission.
It was the saddest day you can imagine.
Blaine wasn't in Dallas the day history would change forever. At the last minute, he agreed to let another agent take guard while he stayed behind in Austin.
I hadn't slept a couple, 3 days.
The visits Kennedy made to Texas were a familiar routine, just like every other city.
We only had 2 threats that we knew about in Texas.
Threats weren't uncommon. Riding in a convertible through the crowded Texas streets left the president a wide open target.
President Kennedy was a man who mingled among the people.
Former Secret Service agent Gerald Blaine and his team members revealed the careful planning that went into JFK's final trip. It's all in his book, The Kennedy Detail. The 35th president was killed by not one, but 2 shots with a sniper rifle along the parade route in Dallas.
Kind of sat up in the bed and was in shock.
A country so close to President Kennedy would never be the same.
We had no idea what condition he was in.
50 years later, Blaine can still remember exactly how that unforgettable day played out.
Most agents did 30 days on the White House detail.
Today, he is teaching students something they can't find in their textbooks.
I just about shot him. Johnson got restless in the middle of the night, and he came around the wrong direction. When I heard the noise, I picked up a Thompson submachine gun and activated it.
To find out more about Blaine's book, The Kennedy Detail, head over to our website, wave3.com. Derek Kupish, Wave 3 News.
Thank you, Derek, and we're back in just a moment.
As we said, the top is down. They are not using the bubble, so it'll be an open limousine parade. Immediately following the presidential limousine, a car loaded with Secret Servicemen. It is our understanding that the motorcade will be moving slowly enough so that everyone along the route will have a good look at the chief executive.
This group all had the same mission, and when we failed, we all failed, and we all knew we failed.
If I had reacted just a little bit quicker,